External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said the West is not the bad guy, as it is not flooding Asian and African markets with goods on a massive scale, and there is a need to get over the syndrome of seeing it in a negative way. In an interview to a Malayalam news channel, Jaishankar also made it clear that he was not batting for the West. He said, and I quote, "It is not the West which is flooding Asia and Africa with goods on a massive scale. I think we need to get over the syndrome of the past that the West is the bad guy, and on the other side are the developing countries. The world is more complicated. The problems are much more complicated than that." The minister was asked whether Chinese President Xi Jinping did not attend the G20 Summit in New Delhi because he did not want India to be seen as the leader of the global South. In response, Jaishankar said the reasons were up for speculation. The foreign minister added that the issue today is the building up of a strong sense over the last 15 to 20 years over the inequities of globalization, where countries see their products, manufacturing and employment come under stress due to their markets being flooded by cheap goods. An indirect but unmistakable reference to China's trade and economic policies. He said this underlying resentment and the pain of those countries regarding the global economy was already building up for the last 15 to 20 years, and the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine conflict have resulted in prices of energy and food items soaring. Therefore, there is a sense of anger building up in countries about them being used as an extractive resource to fuel the economy of another nation. And the West is not to blame for that. That's what Dr. Jaishankar said while clarifying that he wasn't batting for the West. He emphasized that in today's globalization, there is a concentration of manufacturing that is being leveraged and subsidized and was impacting economies of various countries. The External Affairs Minister also commented on the success of India's G20 Summit, saying India is a different country now with a different level of confidence and a different leadership. And the manner in which G20 was conducted has benefited the country. He said the summit showed that the agenda does not have to be decided by the West or by the P5 or by one or two countries, and that India can shape it too. By becoming the voice of the global South and bringing 125 nations together, we straightaway shaped the agenda, he said. All right, so to understand the import of these statements that have been made by India's foreign minister, let's now go across to Ramakrishna Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Global Lens. It's always great to have you on the show, Sri. What do you make of what Dr. Jaishankar has said? I mean, he really didn't have to take any names there. It is so obvious the reference is to China.
Oh, absolutely, Neha, there's no doubt about it. So let's look at what's really happened ever since globalization began, let's say in the early 80s. So in 1981, the poverty rate in Africa, which is defined as people making less than $2 a day, was roughly the same as the rest of the world, which is at about 43%. So in 30 years, Africa has come down to about 35, 36%, but the rest of the world is down to about 5%. So what's happened is, while in 1981, the proportionate rate of poverty in Africa versus the rest of the world was like, pretty much same. In 30 years, this is the gap that's emerged between, Africa and rest of the world, which is like Africa is still 7 times poorer compared to rest of the world. So when our foreign minister talks about the angst, the distress that African countries are witnessing, and the context of them bringing into G20 and India becoming the voice, and these African countries looking at India as a success story, as one of us who has managed to do things, not just grow economically, not just become advanced scientifically in terms of its own space capabilities and everything. He is absolutely bang on. So now, Neha, the question to ask is, why is it that, while East Asian countries manage to gain advantage from globalization, China, India, all of us benefit from globalization, but the African countries did not. So one of the reasons, of course, is that African countries were exploited largely for their natural resources, minerals, and other things. So they were not able to export value added goods. Therefore, they remained basically exporters of raw materials, which don't fetch you any economic value addition compared to, let's say, China, which imported all these raw materials and exported them back to the world, right? So that is one big reason. Now, there are some other reasons which are specific to Africa and African countries, Neha, which is uh, since they focused on purely export of raw materials by and large, their economic activity did not grow as much. So there was no trickle down of wealth that happened to its people. There was no infrastructure buildup. There was no investment in capacity development of people. And unfortunately for the people of Africa, the wonderful people of Africa, the regimes which seem to have been in power over the last several decades, many of them tend to be corrupt, dictatorial, and focused only on their own good rather than the good of the people. So China has obviously gone into this environment with its checkbook and exploited the natural resources of these countries, straddled them with huge debt, and therefore now brought them to a condition, a situation where they are unable to actually repay the debt which China has saddled them on with. So therefore, there is a lot of resentment, anger of having been shortchanged because of this globalization over the last 30 years, Neha. And the world, this part of the world, the African part of the world, is looking to someone like India, basically as a country, as a leader, who's not just fair, who's not just cognizant of their interest, and wants to take them along, but also as a growing superpower which doesn't employ the same policies, the same hegemonistic policies that China does. So that is what I think our foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar, is trying to hint without actually saying that who's the problem, who's the root cause of the problem for all these 3 decades, Neha.
Absolutely. Like I said, he really didn't have to name names. But fact of the matter is, as you pointed out, Shri, that, China's debt diplomacy has been a matter of concern for many years now. How, so many countries in the region have sort of fallen into this debt trap, some of them have ended up becoming Chinese satellites for all practical purposes. So, when the foreign minister says that it is not the West that is flooding your markets with cheap products, obviously it's a reference to China. It's something we've talked about for a long time now. But what I find really interesting is that this strong statement from India's External Affairs Minister not only signals a very distinct geopolitical and economic shift that has happened in recent times, but his choice of words, I think, is very interesting. When he says, the West is not the bad guy, we need to get over that syndrome. So, do you think he felt the need to say that? Because for decades together, it is the Western countries that were painted as the villain, almost seen as, the part of the world that kept the rest of us poor. But now, Dr. Jaishankar is saying, no, it's not the West. The villain lies in another geography today.
Right. So Neha, if you look at world history, I think right up to Second World War, one could have blamed Western powers for colonization, for the poverty that resulted in many parts of the world. But I think we have been living in a changing world since at least the Second World War, where country after country has gained independence, and they have been free to create their own destinies. So I don't think West is a bad guy anymore at all. In fact, if you look at the way US has helped Japan rebuild after it unfortunately bombed Japan in the World War. Then if you look at how Korea has been helped, even China has got a lot of help from US in terms of technology, in terms of manufacturing investment. So I think it is no longer the West, but there's a new axis which is emerging, led by China, which believes that it has been given a short end of the stick, and therefore it's creating a situation where it's building a narrative of West versus us, where China is allegedly not getting its share of a global limelight or the respect or the power that it deserves, where its ambitions are of going back to an era where the old Chinese empire ruled pretty much like large parts of Asia. So now that is, I think, a ridiculous kind of a foreign policy approach for China to take, because we live in a different world today. And therefore, to hark back to an historic kind of a situation and say, oh, we want to bring that back, that is, I think, fairly stupid. The unfortunate bit is China is actually, going ahead and, conducting itself in such a manner which is creating a lot of global instability. I would even say that it's instigating some countries to, go against the West so that it can benefit from the emerging turmoil, Neha. So that really is the unfortunate bit right now.
Absolutely. Not a day goes by when we do not discuss China's hegemony on this show.